So this is to follow up on the Bridge Club's event from last week with some unanswered questions. I think there were a lot of questions that we had in the chat that we couldn't get to just time-wise. So we're here with Mark Cushing and Dr. Stacy Anderson to go through and try to get some of those answered. So I'll paraphrase some of the questions. It won't be exactly how the participants asked, but we'll get through them. So I think first we had some questions about the research that was done in terms of the brainstorming and planning ahead of time for this curriculum, and wanted to know, was this done just on the East Coast or was it all over the country? Could you elaborate a little bit more about what went into that?
The LMU team led by Dean Anderson, of course, is based in East Tennessee, but the Veterinary Innovation Council research that was shared both with the LMU leadership as well as utilizing the LMU draft curriculum to get people's reaction involved veterinarians in practices in shelters across the country, East Coast, Midwest, South, Southwest, and the West Coast. And there was no heavier weighting East versus West. It was very much a national effort with a very broad base of types of practices and scale of practices, as well as large urban shelters that have a need that seems to be met by this type of practitioner.
Okay, thank you. And then I know there were a few people who sort of commented about concerns regarding return on investment, since obtaining, essentially a master's degree doesn't necessarily open up practice acts to allow you, to use your skills in a field that's kind of already underutilized. So do you want to talk about how that will actually help?
A good question, and need to be very clear here. This is not an additional credential vet tech degree. What we've said is that credential vet techs are the most likely candidates for practices and shelters to financially support to earn this master's. Once this master's is achieved, with a combination of additional medical learning right alongside veterinary students, as well as the management, communication, leadership training, it's really designed to have a new mid-level professional that can play a management role in the whole care delivery program and system and practices in companies, as well as for shelters. It won't require any change to a practice act, because veterinary practice acts are silent as to this type of professional. They haven't, frankly, they didn't even conceive of it at the time they were enacted. And there's no need to get permission to do this. So this person could step right into a leadership role, and particularly involving the better use and the full utilization of credential vet techs in a practice. And we would anticipate that this is, and we've discussed it with practices and shelters and all, this is a degree that should earn between $60,000 and say $70,000 as a base salary, which would double for the most part what most credential vet techs make. And that's one of the reasons we think talented, dedicated credential vet techs will find this degree attractive, particularly if they're sponsored, as we envision, by their employer.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and so you said that I guess essentially the practice acts don't necessarily pertain. I mean, I don't want to say pertain, but they don't address this specific role because it's new. But how do you think that'll affect in terms of like what you can legally do? Like, will that restrict you if you have this?
No, it's funny. Stacy's heard me do this in other venues. There's a real misnomer about practice acts. They don't exist to give permission. They basically set the boundaries on who can do certain things. So this professional could not conduct surgery, write prescriptions, or issue final diagnoses or prognoses. There's nothing in practice acts that would restrict the professional from helping a veterinarian work up cases or managing the care delivery team. The practice acts, literally all 50, are silent as to that. They just didn't envision this. But as long as you're not crossing the boundary, that's the key to practice acts. Only veterinarians can do certain things. And then it specifies what a licensed or credentialed vet tech can do. This professional is not addressed, and it becomes a leadership position that practices would welcome, particularly because right now, licensed veterinarians who don't have enough time to see all the patients that want care are having to do that work. They're not even trained to do it, by the way. This is now a professional that's trained to do this, that practices have told us they would welcome, their most qualified vet techs getting a chance to get the degree and step up into that role.
Okay. And how do you feel about, there were a couple questions, like let's say once you earn this degree, how are you going to get basically an employer like a veterinarian in a practice to allow you to do these things?
It's really as simple as it sounds. The whole foundation of this program is that practices will fund an underpaid credentialed vet tech who has the talent and the desire to get this degree. It's assumed that if they're going to fund it, they're doing it because they expect that person to continue in their practice. Of course, the clinical work for the degree can be done in that practice. So the very basics of the mechanics are that a practice is making an investment in a talented employee, excuse me, presumably because they're going to stay either a certain number of years, 3 or 5 years, or just they trust that that person will want to continue and make the investment worthwhile. So I think that's the easiest problem we have to solve. If practices don't fund this, we're not expecting an underpaid credentialed vet tech to, quit her job and go out of pocket for this. So the whole thing depends upon the view of a practice, which has been shared with us, is the view of many practices, that they could use this person, that this is a quicker way to address and a smart way to address the shortages of veterinarians that we have.
Okay, so to make sure I'm following, it sounds like if you're in a progressive practice and they want to invest in you, they can essentially just mold you to be this mid-level person, because then you're going to stay with the practice.
Well, and you acquire skills and learning, and Stacy's talked at length and can amplify, but you acquire learning and skills that are really valuable. This isn't sort of paper learning to get a degree. It's learning tied to a track, customized to fit the need, allowing you to stay in the practice as you gain more skills. And so the practice has already made a judgment that they need this, and this is the person to fill the need.
Okay. And we had a few questions too. I know you mentioned that you don't necessarily have to be a licensed or a credentialed tech to go through this program. So there were some questions about, I guess, why would you want to become credentialed in the first place? Like, could you just go through this program and land in a good spot? Or what are the, I guess, pros and cons of being credentialed versus not if you want to pursue this degree?
I can field that one. So the reason that you'd want to be credentialed is so that you are covered to do the skills as listed in the Practice Act. So if you had someone that just did a BS and then the master's, they wouldn't have the credentials to do any type of veterinary practice or skills and things like that. So that's why it's advantageous to have that. Now, if you had someone that was just going into a practice or a job, let's say an industry job where they don't necessarily need a practice, this, you could do a BS and an MS in this area and still have, some of the background knowledge that you would need as like an industry person without being credentialed. But for someone that's going to be in practice, you definitely would want to be a credentialed veterinary technician in addition to this degree, because otherwise you would be very limited by what you could do.
I think the other point, and Stacy really laid that out, is that the credentialed vet tech position is a 2-year degree. For some people, as they leave high school, that's the opportunity that they have, either locally or to fit their lifestyle. It then gives you the chance to demonstrate to a practice your talent, right, and your abilities and your commitment, which allows a practice to say, we want to make a further investment in you. We see what you can do, and we have this need, and there's this opportunity now from Lincoln Memorial. So would you want to step into it, and we'll fund it. So it's the way you really, frankly, get a practice or a business to make that additional investment in you by being a credentialed vet tech.
Okay. And if you don't mind, I'll skip a little bit here because I just want to say, I know you just mentioned, a lot of technicians just kind of have that 2-year degree, but some have a 4-year. I have a 4-year degree in veterinary technology from Michigan State. So does that differ at all for someone like me? And then second part of this question is, I know there were a few that said, do you have to have a bachelor's degree in order to go on to this program?
So as far as the bachelor's degree in veterinary nursing, veterinary technology, there is a huge difference, as you know, between between 4-year degrees among schools. So some, they actually do more training in the veterinary technician or nursing field. Some, those extra credits are really just gen ed credits and don't really have a huge impact on, I guess, postgraduate training or training for after graduation. So the goal with making this a master's is that it levels the playing field. So regardless of what kind of 4-year degree you had, a master's degree is always going to be a more advanced degree. And so it makes a clear delineation of, yes, I have this extra training, whereas there's quite a bit of ambiguity with 4-year degrees right now. And then for the second part of the question, so as far, and this will address actually multiple of the questions, but we have created or proposed a track where you could have an associate's degree and go into this master's degree with some experience. And unfortunately, because the degree is not approved yet, I can't publish those or really go into a lot of detail, but it's mostly based on years in practice, if you have a specialty certification, type of practice you are working in, and level of experience within a practice. And there's a rubric that I designed that would basically give points for those, depending on the level, and you need to create or meet a minimum to be able to be considered as a student or applicant. Everyone though, regardless of if you're a BS graduate or an AS graduate or associate's graduate, needs to do prerequisite courses. So 6 credits of 100+ level biology, 6 credits of 100+ level chemistry, and 3 credits of 100, at least 100 level English. So that will give, kind of the baseline for some of the courses that we're going to do. And there's minimum GPA requirements that will be advertised as well. So so that there is definitely a minimum requirement. And then the other thing is, there was another question about the 7, or if someone had been in practice for 20 years and wanted to come back and do this this degree, we do require that at least the prerequisite courses have been completed in the last 7 years, because myself included, I would not remember a lot of the basic chemistry that I would need for pharmacology classes, at the level that you're going to do in this master's class. So having that foundation in biology and chemistry kind of refreshed is really important. But those can be done anywhere. I mean, you could do them at a community college or, something like that to keep it affordable. So those are, I know, some of the things that came up with the whole admissions thing. But unfortunately, I have a very detailed admissions protocol, but I can't publish it until the degree is approved officially, and then everything will be advertised on our website. And that was another question, can I find more information on the LMU CVM website? No, because we can't advertise, we can't put anything on there until it's approved by our regional accreditor. So
okay, is there an estimated date of when that will?
It'll be sometime this fall, hopefully in the next couple months. But with any accreditor, you're kind of at the mercy of what their schedule is. So,
yeah, okay. And let me go back to, there were a few people in certain states like Florida and Rhode Island, I guess, where they don't necessarily have title protection, and you don't have to be a credentialed tech to work in a veterinary practice. How do you feel this will impact people in those states?
It really isn't any different in those states. This is a question of the skills, as Stacy just laid out, and she's got the detailed rubric to evaluate those, and then the academic prerequisites that allow you to sit and take veterinary basic science courses. And it'll be up to a Florida veterinarian and a Florida veterinary practice. And we talk to practices based in Florida to decide, do they think they have a need for this type of leadership position? Our learning to date is that they're no different than any state, that they'll have that need, and that a talented vet tech there, regardless of how the current Practice Act treats vet techs. And Florida's is a complicated state, and frankly, not a particularly progressive state regarding treatment of credentialed vet techs. But it's up to the practice to determine that they could use that type of person, so it shouldn't make any difference.
And then we had, I know we'll kind of bounce around a little bit, but there were a few questions about how this is different than like a veterinary practice manager track, or if you had a VTS, that kind of thing. Can we touch on that?
Yeah, so this degree will have more foundational medicine and surgery courses with it, regardless if you did want to track in the kind of the more management track that we do have. You're still going to be required to take courses that are, you know, veterinary topics and not just practice management topics. So that would be the biggest difference to me with this degree as compared to, you know, doing some other, you know, practice management degree or an MBA or something like that.
Yeah, you know, I think if you look in the human side, which we've learned a lot from, and at LMU operates extensively in that area, you know, nurse practitioners or physician assistants have distinctly different jobs than a hospital or clinic manager. And those are all important jobs, but this isn't meant to do human resources, things like that. This isn't the business manager for the practice. This is really focused on the delivery of medical care, and adding this sort of mid-level person with real medical expertise and learning. Again, not usurping or taking on the veterinarian's duties and licensed practice privileges, but supporting those, managing those. And that's what's changed. Practice Acts, in most cases, were designed way before the scale of practice we now have in the US. It probably wasn't conceivable to have practices with 40 to 50 doctors, you know, multiple specialties, or general practices with, you know, 15 doctors and a whole range of employees, from vet assistants to credentialed vet techs to lab technicians and so forth. It's that scale we're really talking about here, or complex urban shelters now. They didn't have veterinary practices when many of the Practice Acts were enacted. So it's as much as anything reflecting the current state and future state of affairs that are only going to get more complicated with greater demand that the current number of veterinarians really can't meet comfortably.
And is this limited to certain species? Like I know you mentioned it would be, you know, a lot of shelter work, that kind of thing. It would be very beneficial, but, you know, are we limiting this to cats and dogs, or do you think there's room in large animal or food animal?
Yeah, so we have tracks in for small animal, large animal, and lab animal for this degree.
Okay, good to know.
Lab animal / exotics, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. What about people who want to just kind of be in industry, whether they're in pharmaceuticals or, I don't know, there's a whole lot of
Yeah, I do have like a research track as well. So they would do some of their, they would, for that track, they would take some of the courses that our veterinary biomedical science master students take. So more traditional science, biomedical science courses.
Okay, so you really can tailor it to your interests.
Exactly.
What you're doing in the veterinary field. Okay.
Yeah.
That's good to know. All right, let's see what else we had. I think we've answered quite a few of these already. There are a lot of questions about specifics with, you know, do I need a specific bachelor's degree? But I think we've kind of already touched on those, and people who have, you know, have various degrees from, you know, 20 years ago or that kind of thing.
Yeah, for the specific degree, I mean, it's just like any other master's program, right? There's a list of requirements to apply and to be eligible to matriculate, and those will all be clearly laid out. But there's no, other than the core prerequisite courses, there's no, you know, specific pre-degree that you need.
Okay, and I think we wanted to just clarify too, in terms of the program, it is online, correct? I guess with the exception of the hands-on clinical skills.
Well, even the clinical skills, we're going to do those like the online veterinary technician programs where you would take videos of yourself doing the skills and send them to us. So the goal is that no one has to come to Harrogate, Tennessee or Ewing, Virginia to complete any part of this degree, that it can be completely done wherever you live.
Okay, so it could be literally in the practice you're working for, as long as someone can kind of sign off. You didn't need a specific, you know, like a preceptor who's been pre-qualified to assess your skills locally.
Not at this point. I mean, we also recognize that this is a new degree, and so sometimes you develop something with one intention and realize that you need to do something different. But that's our intention at this point, is to, you know, have them be able to do it in their own practice, or I guess with a preceptor or something like that, but not have to come physically to this area.
And Lincoln Memorial has experience in the doctor of medical science, which is really an advanced physician assistant program that's done entirely online. And they have, I think, 3 years now of learning and success with that. So, and again, as Stacy emphasized, there are very good online veterinary technology programs, and you work with the practice leaders and they learn what they need to learn to oversee it. But then you have your own school-based assessors. And so Stacy's faculty would be able to do the evaluation and be satisfied that the clinical skill or technique was mastered.
And are there any specific kind of jobs or positions that you would identify that someone with this degree could kind of plug into?
Well, I'll give a couple and let Stacy expand. The basic idea that we confirm with a range of practices throughout the country, emergency, specialty, general, was driven by what we've seen in human medicine in terms of nurses overseeing care delivery, really understanding the whole care delivery mechanism, how you use talent, how you train up talent, how you take credential vet techs and let them use all 100% of what they've been certified by the board exam to know how to do, but really understand that and push the practice and lead the practice into tapping those skills. And what does that mean? It means things that veterinarians were doing, credential vet techs could do, led by someone that understands that, because we think in almost all cases, these will be people that have credential vet tech experience, so they get that. That alone tackles the greatest issue facing vet techs right now, underutilization, which is tied to compensation, right? It's tied to job satisfaction. So here's somebody that's understood that and probably experienced it, stepping into a leadership position, taking off the veterinarian's back, right? The managing of care delivery, not the medicine, not the delivery of the advice, the treatment itself, the surgery, the prescriptions. And that's a critical function. And that applies in all types of practices. So, you know, whatever a practice chooses to call this is up to the practice. But that person has that master's now and has shown that they can frankly sit right alongside veterinary students and take the pre-science or basic science courses they've taken. I think in shelters, Stacy and I have learned that there is a unique need because they cannot compete to pay the salaries that new veterinarians are able to get in the private sector, right? So it's becoming harder and harder for shelters to have the expertise to do what they need to do. And I get a sense from shelters that this person might have even wider kind of leadership role there because they just they can't compete for the veterinary leadership. And at least in taking care of their own animals. So that would be, but it's fairly, if it sounds vague, it's not meant to be vague, it's just very flexible. I think the word here is flexible, designed to meet a practice's need. And Stacy's plan to have tracks allows people to spend their clinical time in the area that they're going to be used in the practice that's paying for their education that they're going to continue with. So there ought to be a real synergy there that's efficient, but you can't give it one name as far as the title or the type of job it is.
Yeah, and with the flexibility, I mean, we have a curriculum developed, but we also are very fast to adapt here at LMU to changing needs of the industry. So, you know, if we find that the small animal track needs some different courses to really get people to be where they want to be, then we'll develop those courses. And I do want to touch on the large animal track, you know, and I know some of this is going to come along with the practice acts and how that those might change or might not. But I mean, large animal practices are very similar to shelter medicine, where you can't, you know, large animal veterinarians do not command the salaries that small animal veterinarians do. And which has led for the last, 10, 20 years of a shortage of large animal practitioners. So, can someone that's trained in some of these areas and topics be an add-on to that large animal practice that can't afford to hire another associate, but needs something a little more educated than a veterinary technician, that in between to help support their practice. So, I don't know, but I do know that there's crises coming in large animal and even equine practice, which equine was generally protected from this, but even equine practice. I'm an equine veterinarian, and I'm very worried that that there won't be enough equine veterinarians, quite frankly, to service the needs of horse owners in the next 5 to 10 years with the trajectory that we're on.
This topic, if we could stay a little bit longer. One of the issues that's always faced veterinary medicine and veterinary medical schools is there's not that much consistent engagement between faculty or leadership with practices concerning a veterinarian's training after they've left the school, right? Mm-hmm. Well, LMU has a special expertise there. They train in the first 3 years students to go into at least 11 different rotations of a month long for their senior or final year instead of a teaching hospital on campus. So they're sent right into the marketplace with a range of practices. And they're not just sitting there for a month watching people do things. They're meant to be useful and frankly, to demonstrate to the practices that they want to hire those people, right? So LMU gets feedback every month on every student and every practice situation, which allows Stacy and her team to look back into the curriculum to say, okay, looks like we don't, and I'm not saying this has happened, but they can look back and say, well, here's a skill we need to spend more time on. They need to be more proficient when they enter the practice. And so if you translate that same school, because this is run by the vet school, into this master's program, working with people online in their clinic that they're planning to stay with, right? You have a perfect link of expertise on LMU's part and a setting to really determine that this student's advancing, that they're getting skills, that they're learning things that matter in their actual practice. So it's not even throwing him into the marketplace as much as saying, this practice invested in you to acquire additional knowledge and talent, so to speak. And I'm not saying we'll hit it out of the park with every student. I mean, Stacy's modest and wouldn't make that claim, but in truth, I think LMU really has a chance to show how that kind of tailored training works and has expertise in doing that. I don't know, Stacy, you have any comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, the thing of the matter is that we at LMU are very interested in supporting the industry. And so, yeah, we're going to do what the industry needs. And Mark is exactly right. We have such a unique kind of, I guess, handle on what is going on in the real world as opposed to, managing a teaching hospital. So we know, which graduates succeed, which don't. We know why. And so kind of the same thing will go for this. We know how to help those that are less successful succeed, but the goal is to design a program that allows everyone to succeed and basically tailor their master's degree to do what they want to do.
And I think you have, if you talk to a credentialed vet tech who understands and maybe has watched this program or it gets further down the road, and asks them, would it make a difference, do you think, in your job right now, in your relationship to the veterinarians in your practice or your shelter or your business setting. If you knew veterinary anatomy and had taken what they took, if you knew veterinary physiology and had taken the same class the vet took, if you knew veterinary pharmacology and had taken the same class, if you had that knowledge, do you think you'd be viewed differently? Do you think you'd have the ability to be helpful and provide, a resource? And I'm betting that the answer in every case, not most cases, in every case is yes. Yes, if I did that, because I don't have that. And that obviously makes a difference. So I think that's a lot of this, besides the communication and leadership training that we're going to have, that's very practice-based. So, I think, and we'll see, we're going to learn a lot as Stacy opens the program once it's accredited.
Any last minute things you wanted to address too? I think we covered the major points of the questions we had, with attendees from the other night, but anything else that you can think of that I'm missing, or?
I have a hard time thinking of any questions, Stacy, that hasn't been asked.
I know. I feel like we could talk about this forever, but like you said, as things get approved on your end, which I guess that was a big question we didn't address, is what's being done in terms of approval from some of the bigger governing bodies like the AVMA and NAVTA and that.
Well, there's no approval needed other than by LMU's accreditor, and that's not meant to say input. We've got the program in many ways has been informed by the Veterinary Innovation Council's 2-year study, research, discussion, evaluation, and recommendations. And so, Stacy provided the curriculum and the course objectives to this whole universe and said, tell us what you think. So that wasn't designed as approval, but if everybody had come back and said, you're missing the boat, you're not doing this right, this doesn't seem we wouldn't be having this discussion today. So, the only approval needed is the one from the accreditor. The marketplace will decide, as it should, what the pace is, how many students start off. And as word spreads, obviously, it always is the case, more and more people hear about it and get involved and talk to their peers and learn what the opportunity is.
Thank you both for your time, and we'll reach out if we need anything else.